Have you ever looked at a couple who genuinely loved each other and wondered, how did they end up so far apart? Not because there was cheating, not because someone stopped caring, but because somehow, little by little, two people who wanted the same thing, a safe, loving relationship, kept hurting each other without even realizing it. What if I told you that one of the biggest relationship traps isn't obvious at all? It's invisible. It quietly shapes your reactions, your arguments, your fears, and even the way you interpret your partner's words. And unless you recognize it, it can slowly pull two loving people in opposite directions. The surprising part is that this trap often has very little to do with the present moment. Instead, it has everything to do with patterns your brain learned long before your current relationship ever began. Imagine this for a moment. One partner sends a text saying, "We need to talk later." For one person, it's just another message. They keep going with their day. For someone else, that same sentence feels like an emotional earthquake. Their heart races. Their mind immediately jumps to worst-case scenarios. They replay every recent conversation, wondering what they did wrong. Meanwhile, another person might see the same text and think, "I don't know," have time for emotional conversations, and instinctively create distance before the discussion even begins. The event is identical. The reactions couldn't be more different. This is where attachment theory offers one of the most fascinating insights in relationship psychology. Developed from decades of research into how humans form emotional bonds, attachment theory suggests that our earliest experiences with closeness, comfort, and emotional safety help shape the expectations we carry into adult relationships. Those expectations don't determine our future, but they can quietly influence how we experience love, conflict, intimacy, and even silence. The invisible trap begins when we mistake these deeply learned emotional patterns for reality. Think about how often people say things like, "You're ignoring me," or "You don't really need me," or "You never let me get close." These statements often feel completely true to the person saying them. But underneath those words is something much deeper than the current disagreement. Often, it's an emotional alarm system reacting to perceived danger rather than actual danger. Our brains evolved to prioritize connection because, throughout human history, close relationships were linked to survival. Feeling emotionally disconnected can activate many of the same stress systems that respond to physical threats. That's why rejection, criticism, or emotional distance can feel surprisingly intense. Your body isn't simply responding to today's conversation. Sometimes it's responding to old emotional patterns that have been activated in the present. The difficult part is that most people don't realize this is happening. Instead, they become convinced that the problem is entirely their partner's behavior. Consider Sarah and Michael. They've been together for 5 years. Sarah often feels like Michael is emotionally unavailable. If he spends a quiet evening working on his laptop instead of talking, she starts wondering whether he's losing interest. She becomes anxious, asks if everything is okay, and seeks reassurance. Michael, on the other hand, genuinely loves Sarah, but every time she asks if something is wrong, he feels like he's failing another invisible test. He begins feeling overwhelmed. Instead of moving closer, he pulls back to avoid conflict, hoping that giving everyone space will calm things down. To Sarah, his distance confirms her deepest fear. He's emotionally leaving me. To Michael, her repeated questions confirm his own fear. Nothing I do is ever enough. Neither of them wakes up intending to hurt the other. Neither of them is trying to destroy the relationship. Yet both are unknowingly feeding the very cycle they desperately want to escape. This is what makes invisible relationship traps so powerful. They aren't created by bad intentions. They're created by misunderstandings that repeat often enough to become emotional habits. One partner reaches for connection. The other reaches for space. Each response unintentionally strengthens the other's fears. Over time, both partners become exhausted, confused, and increasingly convinced they're incompatible. But compatibility isn't always the real issue. Sometimes the real issue is that two nervous systems are trying to protect themselves in completely different ways. One of the biggest misconceptions about healthy relationships is the belief that love alone automatically heals emotional wounds. It would be comforting if that were true. But love and emotional security are not exactly the same thing. You can deeply love someone and still struggle to trust that they'll stay. You can love someone and still become uncomfortable when emotional conversations feel too intense. You can love someone and still misunderstand each other's emotional needs. This realization isn't meant to discourage anyone. In fact, it's incredibly hopeful. Because once you recognize these patterns, they become something you can understand instead of something that silently controls you. Psychologists often describe attachment styles as flexible patterns rather than permanent identities. They're not personality types carved in stone. They're adaptive strategies that developed over time, usually because they helped us cope with our earliest relationships. What protected us years ago, however, may not serve us in adulthood. Imagine learning as a child that expressing sadness usually led to comfort. Your brain might naturally come to expect that emotional closeness is safe. Now imagine the opposite. Suppose emotional needs were often ignored, criticized, or met inconsistently. Your brain might become extra alert for signs of rejection, or it might learn that depending on others feels risky. Neither response means something is wrong with you. They're simply understandable adaptations. The challenge is that adult romantic relationships often activate these old emotional maps, more intensely than almost any other relationship. A delayed text message isn't just a delayed text message. An unanswered phone call isn't always just a missed call. A partner asking for space isn't always experienced as a simple request. Instead, these everyday moments can become symbols. Symbols of abandonment, symbols of failure, symbols of rejection, or symbols of losing freedom. And because these reactions happen so quickly, they often feel automatic. By the time we notice our emotions, our minds have already begun creating stories about what they mean. He doesn't care. She's disappointed in me. They're going to leave. I'll never be enough. What's remarkable is that these thoughts often appear before we've gathered enough evidence to know whether they're actually true. Our brains are prediction machines. They're constantly trying to protect us by filling in missing information. Sometimes those predictions are accurate. Other times they're influenced more by past experiences than by the present reality. That's why two people can live through the exact same conversation and walk away with completely different emotional memories of what happened. One remembers feeling unheard, the other remembers feeling unfairly criticized. Both experiences are emotionally real, but neither tells the entire story. And that's where the invisible trap quietly tightens. Instead of becoming curious about what's happening beneath the surface, most couples begin arguing about whose version of reality is correct. They spend months, sometimes years, trying to prove who started the conflict, who misunderstood whom, or who should apologize first. Meanwhile, the deeper question remains unanswered. What invisible emotional pattern keeps pulling both of them back into the same painful dance, even when neither of them wants to keep repeating it? The answer often has less to do with the specific argument and much more to do with what each person's nervous system is trying to protect. This is why the same disagreement can happen over and over again, even if the topic changes. One week, it's about texting back quickly enough. The next week, it's about spending time with friends. Then it's about household chores, finances, or making plans for the weekend. On the surface, the issues look completely different. But underneath, the emotional questions remain exactly the same. One partner is silently asking, "Can I trust that you'll still choose me, even when we're upset?" The other is quietly wondering, "Can I be accepted without feeling like I'm constantly disappointing someone?" Neither question is usually spoken out loud. Instead, they appear disguised as criticism, defensiveness, withdrawal, or frustration. Think about how easily misunderstandings can grow when these hidden fears stay invisible. Imagine someone coming home after an exhausting day at work. They're mentally drained and unusually quiet. Their partner notices the silence almost immediately. If they already carry a fear of emotional abandonment, that quietness may feel deeply personal. Within minutes, they begin asking, "Is something wrong? Are you upset with me? Did I do something?" They're looking for reassurance, hoping to restore a sense of emotional safety. But now imagine the person who just walked through the door. They aren't upset with their partner at all. They're simply overwhelmed by the day and need a little time to decompress. Suddenly, instead of getting that space, they're met with a series of emotional questions they don't feel ready to answer. They begin feeling pressured, even though their partner's intention was simply to reconnect. Now both people feel misunderstood. One feels emotionally abandoned. The other feels emotionally overwhelmed. Ironically, both partners are trying to protect the relationship in the only way their nervous systems know how. One reaches for closeness because closeness feels safe. The other reaches for temporary distance because calming down first feels safe. Unfortunately, each person's protective strategy unintentionally activates the other's deepest fear. This is one of the most well-studied relationship patterns in attachment research. Therapists sometimes describe it as the pursue-withdraw cycle. One partner pursues more connection. The other withdraws to reduce emotional intensity. The more one pursues, the more the other withdraws. And the more one withdraws, the more urgently the other pursues. If you've ever found yourself in this cycle, you probably know how confusing it can feel. At first, both people believe they're responding reasonably. The person seeking reassurance thinks, "If we could just talk this through, we'd be okay." The person pulling away thinks, "If we could just stop arguing for a while, everything would settle down." Both intentions are understandable. Yet together, they create exactly the opposite result. Over time, these repeated interactions begin changing how each partner interprets the or GOAD relationship itself. Instead of seeing individual disagreements, they begin developing broader conclusions. Maybe we just aren't compatible. Maybe love isn't supposed to feel this hard. Maybe we've simply grown apart. Sometimes those conclusions are accurate, but many times they're actually describing the effects of an invisible emotional cycle, rather than the relationship itself. That's an important distinction, because if the cycle changes, the relationship often changes too. Research consistently shows that healthy couples don't avoid conflict altogether. In fact, every long-term relationship experiences misunderstandings, disappointment, and moments of emotional disconnection. The difference isn't whether conflict happens, it's how couples understand what's happening beneath the conflict. Imagine two different responses to the exact same disagreement. In the first, one partner says, "You're always so distant." The other immediately replies, "You're impossible to satisfy." Within seconds, both people are defending themselves instead of understanding each other. Now imagine a different response. Instead of accusing, one partner pauses and says, "When things get quiet between us, I notice I start worrying that we're drifting apart." Instead of defending, the other responds, "I didn't realize that's what was happening for you. When I get quiet, it's usually because I'm trying to calm my own mind, not because I'm pulling away from you." Notice what changed. The facts didn't. The emotions didn't disappear. What changed was the meaning. Instead of assuming harmful intentions, both people became curious about the emotional experience underneath the behavior. Curiosity is surprisingly powerful in relationships because it interrupts automatic assumptions. Our brains naturally want quick explanations. We see a behavior, and within seconds we assign a motive. They ignored my message because they don't care. They criticized me because they don't respect me. They asked for space because they're losing interest. Sometimes those explanations turn out to be true, but often they're incomplete. Human behavior is remarkably complex. A delayed reply could reflect stress, distraction, emotional overload, poor time management, or dozens of other possibilities that have nothing to do with love itself. The challenge is that our attachment system doesn't like uncertainty. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable because the brain interprets unclear situations as potential threats. To reduce that discomfort, it quickly fills in the blanks. Unfortunately, those assumptions are often shaped by our past emotional experiences rather than the present reality. That's why two people can witness the exact same event and tell completely different stories about what happened. One remembers rejection. The other remembers pressure. One remembers feeling invisible. The other remembers feeling trapped. Both stories contain genuine emotions, but emotions and interpretations are not always the same thing. Recognizing that difference can completely transform the way couples communicate. Instead of arguing over whose perception is objectively correct, they begin exploring why each experience felt so real. That question changes everything, because underneath nearly every recurring relationship conflict is a much quieter conversation that never gets spoken aloud. Do I matter to you? Will you stay when things get difficult? Can I be fully myself without losing your love? Those questions aren't signs of weakness. They're deeply human. Every person, regardless of their attachment style, carries some desire for emotional safety, acceptance, and connection. The difference lies in how those needs are expressed and how easily they become hidden behind behaviors that seem, on the surface, to mean something entirely different. The challenge is that once those behaviors become familiar, couples often stop seeing the fear underneath them. They only see the reaction. The person asking for reassurance starts looking needy. The person asking for space starts looking cold. Over time, these labels become shortcuts that erase the much more complicated emotional reality. But people are rarely just their reactions. The partner who keeps asking, "Are we okay?" may not be trying to control the relationship. They may simply be trying to quiet a nervous system that has learned to scan constantly for signs of disconnection. Their questions aren't necessarily about a lack of trust in you. Sometimes they're about the difficulty of trusting that closeness can last. Likewise, the partner who becomes quiet during conflict may not be avoiding responsibility or refusing to care. Their nervous system may be overwhelmed by emotional intensity. As stress rises, their brain shifts into self-protection, making it harder to think clearly, express feelings, or stay fully present in the conversation. Neither reaction automatically makes someone the good partner or the bad partner. In fact, one of the most damaging myths about relationships is the idea that one person causes all the problems while the other simply reacts. Healthy relationship psychology tells a much more nuanced story. Relationships are systems. Each person's behavior influences the other, often in ways neither partner intends. Imagine tossing two dancers onto a stage without music. At first, each person moves independently, but after a while, they begin responding to one another's movements. If one steps back, the other steps forward. If one speeds up, the other adjusts. Eventually, they're creating a pattern together. Relationships work in much the same way. The difficulty is that emotional dances can become so automatic that neither partner realizes they're repeating the same choreography. One criticism leads to withdrawal. Withdrawal leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to more criticism. More criticism leads to even greater withdrawal. After months, or even years, it becomes almost impossible to remember where the cycle actually began. This is why trying to determine who started the pattern is often less helpful than understanding how the pattern continues. The moment couples stop fighting each other and begin recognizing the cycle as the real challenge, something remarkable can happen. Instead of standing on opposite sides of the problem, they begin standing together against it. That shift sounds simple, but psychologically it's profound. Because blame keeps people defensive. Curiosity invites cooperation. Think about the last time someone misunderstood your intentions. Chances are you didn't immediately feel motivated to become more vulnerable. You probably wanted to explain yourself. Maybe you even became defensive because you felt unfairly judged. Now imagine your partner saying something different. Instead of "you never listen," they say, "I know you probably don't mean to, but sometimes I leave our conversations feeling alone." Notice how different those two statements feel. The first attacks identity. The second describes experience. When people feel attacked, their brains naturally prepare for defense. Heart rate increases. Stress hormones rise. Listening becomes harder because survival systems begin taking over. But when people feel emotionally safe, another part of the brain becomes more available. Empathy increases. Curiosity grows. The ability to reflect instead of react becomes much stronger. This doesn't mean every conversation suddenly becomes easy. It means the conversation has a better chance of becoming productive. One fascinating finding from relationship research is that emotional repair matters more than emotional perfection. Every couple experiences moments of misunderstanding. Every couple says things they wish they could take back. Every couple has days when stress, exhaustion, or outside pressures affect how they communicate. What predicts healthier long-term relationships isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the willingness to repair after those mistakes happen. Repair can look surprisingly ordinary. A sincere apology, a gentle touch after an argument, admitting, "I misunderstood what you meant," saying, "Help me understand what you were feeling," or simply recognizing, "I think we're getting caught in that same cycle again." These small moments send an incredibly powerful message to the nervous system. We're not enemies. We may be struggling right now, but we're still on the same team. That sense of emotional teamwork creates something psychologists often call secure functioning. It doesn't mean either person becomes perfectly secure overnight. Rather, the relationship itself begins feeling like a place where both people can recover from conflict instead of fearing that every disagreement threatens the future. This is one reason secure relationships aren't defined by never experiencing fear. They're defined by repeatedly experiencing repair. Each repair becomes evidence. Evidence that conflict doesn't always lead to abandonment. Evidence that emotional closeness can survive misunderstandings. Evidence that vulnerability doesn't always end in rejection. Over time, these repeated experiences begin creating new expectations. Instead of automatically assuming the worst, the brain slowly learns a different possibility. Maybe we're okay. Maybe this disagreement doesn't mean the relationship is falling apart. Maybe my partner's behavior isn't about rejecting me. These shifts don't happen through positive thinking alone. They happen through consistent emotional experiences that gradually reshape how safety is felt inside the relationship. This is why lasting relationship growth is usually less dramatic than people imagine. It's rarely one grand romantic gesture. It's hundreds of ordinary moments. Choosing to pause before assuming. Choosing to ask instead of accuse. Choosing to explain instead of withdraw. Choosing to stay emotionally present even when discomfort makes running away seem easier. Little by little, those choices begin changing the emotional climate of the relationship. And perhaps that's the most hopeful part of attachment theory. Your attachment patterns may explain some of your instincts, but they don't have to define your future. The brain remains capable of learning throughout life. New relationships, healthier communication, emotionally responsive partners, therapy, self-reflection, and repeated experiences of safety can all help reshape old expectations. What once felt automatic can gradually become more flexible. That doesn't mean the fears disappear forever. It means they no longer have to make every decision for you. Because healing isn't about becoming someone who never feels insecure. It's about becoming someone who recognizes those feelings without allowing them to control every interaction. And when two people are willing to do that together, something beautiful begins to happen. The invisible trap starts losing its power. The arguments become less about winning and more about understanding. Silence becomes less frightening because trust has grown stronger. Distance becomes temporary instead of catastrophic. Closeness becomes something that feels earned through honesty rather than demanded through fear. In many ways, the strongest relationships aren't built by people who never struggle. They're built by people who learn to recognize the hidden patterns beneath their struggles and who choose again and again to meet those patterns with compassion instead of blame. So if you saw yourself somewhere in this conversation, don't take it as proof that something is wrong with you or your relationship. Instead, see it as an invitation to become more curious about your own emotional patterns, more compassionate toward your partners, and more intentional about the way the two of you respond to each other. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough in a relationship doesn't happen when someone changes who they are. It happens when both people finally understand what has been quietly driving their reactions all along. If this video helped you see your relationships through a new lens, let me know in the comments. Which attachment pattern or relationship cycle felt most familiar to you? Your story might help someone else feel a little less alone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next deep dive into the psychology of love, attachment, and emotional healing. And if you're ready to understand the hidden forces that shape lasting connection even more deeply, watch in the next video on your screen. You may discover the missing piece that changes the way you experience relationships forever.